What has happened to the Palestinians since 1948?
Why should the Palestinians have to pay for those
Yeah, why
sins?
should we have to give up our land?
Why are they being punished for what they did not do? There are different narratives of what happened in 1948.
Over the last few years, a cement wall has been built separating one part of the Holy Land from the other part. Paul, tell them about what has happened to the Palestinians since 1948. I mean, in 1948, the UN passed a resolution, Resolution 242. And in that resolution, certain land was set aside for the construction of the State of Israel. And incidentally, it was constructed because of the anti-Semitism of the rest of the world. We'd made life hell for Jews constantly. And so the Jewish Zionists said, no matter where we've gone to live, we've been persecuted. No matter where we've tried to adapt to the society and be good citizens, they ended up killing us. Whether it was in Spain in the Middle Ages or whether it was in Germany, we thought we were the scientists, we were the musicians, we were teaching in the universities. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, came this guy with a crazy mustache. And all of this repressed hostility emerged. And we Jews suddenly found ourselves being carted off to concentration camps. We can't trust people unless we have our country of our own. And so we said, all of these Jewish refugees, we didn't know what to do with. Let's find a place for them to live. And they took a chunk of Palestine and carved it out. Get this, a group of people sitting in New York City who weren't Palestinians decided what would happen to the land that Palestinian people had been living on for 1,000 years, and said to these people, this land isn't yours anymore, it's going to belong to Israel.
Well, they were told that they would be divided, that the native indigenous population would be protected, but it hasn't exactly unfolded that way. And the Palestinians will be quick to point out that the sins of Europe, of Christian Europe, why should the Palestinians have to pay for those sins?
Why should we have to give up our land?
Why are they being punished for what they did not do?
And starting in the war in 1948, 132 Palestinian villages.
No, it's somewhere between 430 and 530.
Yeah, that's to the present time, isn't it?
No, in 1948. I actually have a coffee table book this size and about this thick of all of the Arab villages in 1948.
Did you know this? That hundreds of Palestinian villages were just leveled. They came in with bulldozers, bulldozed these houses that belonged to Palestinian people, saying, you don't live here anymore, and chased them out of town, and they became refugees on the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. And many of these brothers and sisters were Christians. And they wanted to know, why are the Christians in America so anxious to support Israel without question and never ask any questions about the injustices that we are having to endure at the hands of an Israeli army that is paid for and equipped by American taxpayers, that the American Christians support this oppression, this destruction of our villages, the destruction of our homes, the murdering of our people. I mean, it's been horrible.
Because we haven't heard that part.
Let me just say this before you go any further. When we confronted the Israeli executives, the deputy prime minister, when we dealt with the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, because we had this privilege, certain things worked out for us to see high Israeli officials. You know, they didn't deny it. Right. They simply shrugged their shoulders and say, well, it's war. All kinds of terrible things happen in war. And I was saying, yes, but there is such a thing as war crimes. And people ought to be put on trial for war crimes. And when you go in and slay innocent people and destroy villages indiscriminately, they're war crimes and should be punished. And I don't want anybody to be let off the hook on these things.
Now, I'd like to say, in fairness, too, there are different narratives of what happened in 1948. Yeah. And there is one narrative says that the Arab countries called for the Palestinian people to leave their homes voluntarily so that the other Arab armies could come in and
fight the Jews.
But it has been shown, even by the new historians in Israel, that is not completely true. Yeah. And that there definitely were war crimes. There were massacre, like the massacre at Deir Yassin, which was a neutral village where everyone was murdered. And
here's a village where there were pacifists.
They were
The
pacifists.
entire village were pacifists. They were committed to nonviolence, and there they were. They weren't out to hurt anybody. They refused to take sides in the conflict. And the Israeli army came in and slaughtered everybody in the village.
But I need to also point out that there are injustices on the other side too. There, in 1939 in Hebron, there were massacres of Jews by Arabs too. So I mean, there's bloodshed that goes all the way around. But when you're hit with the realization that I never heard this story in school, I never heard the part where all these villages were decimated and that immigrants from Europe and other countries came in and moved into these houses. And we drove by, we actually saw these old Palestinian mansions with Arabic in the foundation, actually in the architecture, where these people were driven out of their homes. And they'll come back years later with their keys and with their deeds and feeling like they still own this property. They just want to see it because they planted the trees, they built the homes. And, you know, you can imagine what that feels like to come back to your home and you're chased away. You can't even...
Yeah. Well, and more than that, it's what's going on today that's really scary.
And here it is.
Yeah. Tell them about the wall.
This is...
Can you get a close-up of that?
I bought this in Bethlehem at a Christian merchant close to the Church of the Nativity. Part of what the Palestinian Christians do for their economy is make these nativity scenes out of olive wood, and you've all seen them before. But this particular one was interesting because here are the three wise men, and here's the separation wall that's recently been built, and here's the grotto where Jesus is born, and the wise men can't get to they can't get through the wall to get to Jesus.
How many of you are aware that over the last few years, with U.S. tax dollars, a cement wall about 30 feet high has been built, separating the one part of the Holy Land from the other part? And to their credit, and I disagree with the Palestinians at this point, it has in fact decreased terrorism. I mean, I say there is...
Well, that's what you say, and that's what the Israeli talking points are. But the Palestinians are quick to point out you can get around this wall, which we did on the way to the airport.
Yeah.
So if a terrorist wanted to get into Israel proper bad enough, they certainly could.
It's not a terrorist who was on their bad list. You know, the guy that made this thing, we met him. Mm-hmm. He was 15 years old when he broke curfew. He stayed out later than midnight.
And Israelis are able to impose curfew anytime they want.
And even though it's not their land. I mean, it's one country imposing a curfew on people in another country. So this kid stayed out past midnight. He was arrested. As he said, I hadn't thrown any stones. Right. I hadn't done anything bad. I just stayed out too late. He was put in jail for 5 months. And when he was released, he didn't realize this. His name was put on a list. And he cannot go through a checkpoint now. Now, Bethlehem is enclosed with this wall, see? So this guy, who was in his late 40s...
He's in a cage.
He's in a cage. He hasn't been able to leave Bethlehem his entire life.
He would love to come to America.
He'd just like to get out of here.
And he studied at Hebrew University. He spoke English. He's educated.
Yeah, he was best speaking English guy I met. Brilliant guy.
And he's
social work degree.
So what's the answer?